our challenge from Professor Sid. So before we get started today, I have a question for you. How many of you have a really good memory? Like, go ahead and raise your hand. All right. So you remember, well, let me ask you a few questions and then we'll see. You raise your hand if you remember. Okay. So how many of you remember what you had for breakfast this morning? Okay. How many of you remember what you wore 2 days ago? Like your shirt, your pants, your shoes, like you remember what you wore 2 days ago. All right? This one's a little bit more tricky. How many of you remember something you got for Christmas 2 years ago? All right? And then this one is of all of them, this one's the hardest. How many of you remember the hospital that you were born in? Like your parents told you the name of the hospital and you remember. You remember where you were born. Not the day, because that's weird. None of us remember the day we were born, but you remember what hospital you're in. Okay, good deal. So some of you have really good memories. Now here's the thing. As I got more and more specific, it just got more and more difficult for you to remember, right? So in our story today, Jesus tells his best friends something that they absolutely have to remember. There is no forgetting this. Like the disciples, Jesus' very close friends, they have to remember what he's about to tell them. So you ready for the story? Okay, here we go. So Jesus, a few days before, had entered into the city of Jerusalem. It's called Palm Sunday for us. Now he enters into the streets and they're celebrating. They're cutting down palm branches. They're laying their cloaks down in front of him as he's walking, or as he's riding through the city on a donkey. You guys remember this? We talked about it last week. Now, if you fast forward a few days, there's this big celebration of Passover that's happening. Now, what's Passover? We talked a little bit about it last week, but I'll give you a little bit more this week. So Passover is a celebration of the first time, of the last night that the Israelites spent as slaves in Egypt. If you remember right, with Moses and the Israelites and the Hebrews, they were there and they were enslaved and God was going to rescue them. So he sent 10 plagues, and the very last plague, on the very last night, every firstborn man, every firstborn boy, every firstborn male died. Now, the Hebrews were not harmed at all. The Israelites, the people of God, they were not harmed at all because they took the blood of a lamb and they wiped it on their doorposts. And it was the blood that saved them. So the Passover meal, which we have one right here, is to remember that night. To remember the night that God saved everyone. So for thousands of years now, they are having this meal. And it's a really special meal. It has herbs and bread and wine and something called harseth. There's just this really yummy sauce stuff. If you've never had it, you gotta try it. So they're there and they're having this really amazing meal together. But at one point in the meal, Jesus turns to them and says something shocking to them. Something that they would have never thought would be words that would be coming out of the mouths of Jesus. And here's what he says. He says, I assure you, I tell you, one of you, you're going to betray me. Now, they're all looking around the table. All of Jesus' friends are looking around the table, and they're thinking, is it you? Is it you? Is it you? Who is it? And finally, one of the ones that's sitting next to Jesus turns to Jesus and says, Master, who is it? Who's the one who's going to betray you? And so Jesus takes a piece of bread, and he dips it, and he gives it to someone. Now, does anybody remember the name of the person that betrayed Jesus? If you know, just shout it out. It's Judas. So Jesus gives the bread to Judas, and he tells them, look, do what you're going to do. Now, none of them really know what that means. But Judas then gets up, and he heads out. He heads out to go find some religious leaders that want Jesus dead, and he's going to tell them where to find them. He's going to turn Jesus over to be arrested. But then Jesus goes on with the meal. Jesus is not going to let this get in the way of something that he knows that his friends, his disciples have to know and they have to remember. So what does he do? As the meal's coming to a close, Jesus takes some bread. Now this bread is called matzah. It's unleavened, which means it doesn't have any yeast in it. So it doesn't get fluffy, it doesn't get big. It's kind of like a cracker. And so Jesus takes this matzah and he shows it to them. And he says something that they have to remember. See, they had had Passovers with Jesus before. They had had Passovers their entire lives. They were Jews after all. So that every year of their life, they had celebrated Passover. But now Jesus is making a twist. Jesus is changing it, and he's bringing some fresh new things into this that they've never heard before. And now he's actually telling them what this whole meal is actually about. Yes, it's celebrating something that happened thousands of years ago, but it is actually pointing to Jesus. This meal has actually been about Jesus the whole time. So he takes the bread and he breaks it. Now, if you look at the bread, you will see stripes and you will see holes. You will see places that it's been pierced. The lines are from how it's been baked. But as Jesus breaks the bread, he tells them, this is my body. It's going to be broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Whenever you eat this bread, I want you to remember me, because my body is going to be broken for you. And of course, it would be. Jesus would be handed over. He would be beaten. He'd be spit on. He was going to be whipped with whips. And eventually he would be pierced just like this bread. He would have nails driven through his hands and through his feet. And those holes would be in Jesus, just as it is in this bread. So whenever you eat this, do this in remembrance of me. Remember me. Remember how my body's going to be broken. And so he broke it, and he handed it to his disciples. Now, after they had eaten, Jesus then takes a cup. And in the cup would be wine. And Jesus took this cup and he said, I need you to remember this, guys. I need you to remember that this cup just isn't wine. This cup, actually, it's like my blood. This cup and this wine, like you're going to need to remember this, guys, because my blood is going to have to be spilled out for you, for the forgiveness of sins. There is no forgiveness without my blood being spilt. When I'm whipped and beaten and bloodied and put on a cross to die, when my hands and my feet are pierced and blood pours out, that's how sin is going to be forgiven. It's going to cost me everything, guys. It's going to cost me my life. So whenever you drink this, remember my sacrifice. Remember me. So Jesus then gives them the cup, and they all drink from it. Now after the meal, they begin to sing. They begin to sing praises to God, and they begin to worship him. So, here's what we're going to do. Let's push pause on this story. Let's talk about this for a few minutes, and then we'll come right back. So see you then.